What's up, everybody? It's your boy JR Lee, and I'm back for another special episode of the Fly on the Wall Show. And today, I'm so excited. We have a very amazing, dominating guest. Man, I'm so excited to speak to Cara Goldin. And Cara, for the people who may not know who you are, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what it is that you do and have done?
Yeah, well, I'm the founder of this product over here, hint. So I started the company, gosh, almost 16 and a half years ago. And up until recently, was the CEO of the company. I've been the founder. I'll always be the founder, but I've been running the company for the last 16 and a half years, and which has been really fun and exciting, and growing it from zero to where it is today is lots of fun. But I think that more than anything, the thing when I think about the company and why I started it, it was really a purpose, a mission to really help myself get healthy. And by starting to get diet sweeteners out of my life, that was really the key thing for me. I never really thought that diet sweeteners were bad. I mean, who does, right? You think it's zero and low fat and all of this stuff, that is sort of describing so many of these diet sweeteners today. I don't think most consumers, I think more and more people are onto it, but I think even 16 years ago, it was really kind of foreign to people. They just thought like, oh, are diet sweeteners bad for me? I have no idea. But when I saw that I could actually create a drink and not only help myself, but also help lots of other people, just by eliminating diet sweeteners, I thought that was pretty cool. And so I took it to a local store in San Francisco, and people started buying it. And I was like, hey, like, this is great. I mean, how hard could it be to build a beverage company? And suddenly, we started getting into more stores and more areas of the US. And today, Hint is the largest non-alcoholic beverage in the country that doesn't have a relationship with Coke or Pepsi. So it's exciting. It's exciting to think that it was, getting those first bottles on the shelf and growing it to where it is today. It's lots of fun.
Absolutely, absolutely. And speaking a little bit about the diet sweeteners, me and my girlfriend, we loved your book, we read your book, and in the book it said that you were up to about 10 cans of soda. Is the number wrong, or 10
Yeah,
cans?
well, it's interesting. I was a big fountain soda drinker. So I would go I grew up in Arizona. I would go to Circle K and and go and fill up. So it was probably about 10. And then when I
What
worked,
was your favorite soda?
well, Diet Coke, of course. I was never the people at Pepsi, I think, love me because I never was drinking Diet Pepsi. I was drinking Diet Coke, and that's when I really realized that I had an issue. But I think more than anything, like I said, it's finding something that you really most people, I think, today think, okay, I'm going to get healthier by restricting calories, by running more or exercising in some way, versus actually figuring out, is there something I'm doing in my life that is actually causing me not to be as healthy as I want?
Warning, this is not your average haircut. I mean, in fact, this is not a haircut at all. This is the Marcus Alexander Well Groom Experience, which I highly recommend for the image invested individual. Are you looking to transform not only your physical, but your mental and your spiritual? Then this is the experience I recommend for you, Marcus Alexander. Go and book him now, today.
And I think, if anything good came out of COVID, it's that people are more and more focused on wanting to stay healthy, right? They don't want to get sick. If they get sick, they're dealing with it. But I don't think anybody really wants to get sick, right? And I think that people are focused more and more on trying to figure it out. How is their system reacting to whatever they're doing? And I think oftentimes it's not just about restricting calories. It's not just about exercising more. It might actually be something that you think that you're doing every single day in your life that actually needs, that's the thing that really needs to change most. And that was my case.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. And so, Kara, I want to take it back to the beginning a little bit, right? And so, growing up, you know, you started working at the age of 14. That's correct, right? You started working at the age of 14. Everybody in your household was a worker, and you know, your father, right? I'm pretty sure your father played a big role in your life. I saw in the book that, you know, something that happened to you later on in life kind of happened to him early on in his career. Well, not early on in his career, but early on in your life, where he was working for this big corporation and he ended up making a lot of money, but then he was asked to leave because of, you know, qualifications, right? And so later on, you experienced something similar where a company got acquired and, you know, the company got acquired and you didn't want to move away, right? Did you see a correlation between your father and yourself later on in your journey where you had to make a decision?
You mean with AOL?
Yes,
Or
ma'am. Yes,
yeah,
ma'am.
yeah. Well, you know, it was interesting. I was I mean, it's funny. A lot of people haven't talked to me about. I've done a lot of podcasts, but I haven't talked too much about this. You know, it was interesting because we were acquired. I was with a little startup called To Market, and we were acquired by America Online. And the initial thinking was that because we were based in San Francisco and AOL was based in Virginia, that I couldn't actually stay with the company because they were, you know, moving everybody. It's so crazy to even think about it now. I mean, everybody's virtual, right? Anyway, but it was like they had this idea that everybody had to be based in Virginia. And I think when I stopped to talk to them a little bit further about kind of the business that I was doing and the fact that retailers were all over the US, then they were like, wait, we need you back here. What are we doing? I mean, this is crazy. We don't care where you live or if you have an office. So I think in many ways I was living virtually, right? You know, 25 years ago. I just didn't really think about it, I think, at that time. Living and working virtually. But, you know, the situation with my dad in particular, I think was pretty interesting. It's something I talk to my kids about a lot, which is, you know, being, again, things change over time for people who he would have been in his 90s. You know, people got a job, like a job, and they worked there forever, right? Until they died. I mean, until they retired. And maybe you had 2 opportunities in your lifetime, but beyond 2, you were kind of considered a failure, right? Like you stood out as not being able to hold a job, right? I mean, today people shift jobs all the time. Maybe they, you know, went to law school and then they decide, I don't really want to be a lawyer, or I don't, you know, really want to be a tech executive, and I want to do something that makes me happier. I mean, that just was not the dialogue that I grew up with, right? And I watched him dedicate his life to building something inside of a large company. And ultimately he was fired because he didn't have an MBA. And it's sort of ironic that this, you know, happened to him. That if for me, when I sat there and watched him, he had built a brand inside of Armor Food Company initially, which was then acquired by a company called ConAgra. But I mean, he had built a big brand called Healthy Choice inside these companies. And I thought, how the heck can you get fired? And
I think let somebody go who's has so much impact.
Yeah, I mean, it was insane, right? And nothing made sense. And I think sometimes, I think the moral of the story is sometimes things never make sense, right?
Yeah.
And but there's rules, right? And there's ideas that, well, this is what we have to do. Everybody in the company needs to have an MBA. And for, you know, my dad, he had 5 kids. I mean, there was no way he was going back to school. I mean, he was 55 years old. I mean, it was just, you know, it was just kind of, he didn't have a lot of options. But in the end, the good news on the story is that he ultimately was hired back into ConAgra because he had these relationships with a lot of his suppliers. And it's fascinating, to think back on that, because many of his suppliers, by the way, were shrimp fishermen, a lot of, people that were, they were, on the line, actually, supplying the food, and a lot of those people, most of them didn't have an MBA. They didn't even have a college degree. And so they started like wondering, how can he get fired? He's cool. And, just because he doesn't have an MBA, why is that happening to me? I just realized that my mic, are you getting good sound?
Yes, I can hear you. I can hear you.
Okay, good. So that was, it was interesting, but I think, look, with all lessons, that's part of my journey. And it's
Absolutely.
part of something that I think about. It's something that I educate and teach people about. I definitely, my own kids, when I'm speaking to college students too, it had an effect on me. And I think that that's one thing that I think about as it relates to, people, is you never really know what somebody's been through, right? It's not something that I necessarily, when I first meet people, I don't say, oh, by the way, my dad was fired when I was in high school, right? Like, it'll just come up later on, maybe in a conversation, maybe not. But when you have opinions about things, you go back on your journey and think about how that really changes your perception on, different conversations, for example.
Yes, ma'am. Well, thank you so much for answering that question for me.
Yeah.
You mentioned, of course, and you mentioned something very important. You said something about your father and his relationships, which kind of ties into one of the questions that I wanted to kind of ask about. The thing with AOL, you end up actually becoming a consultant because of the fact that they couldn't let you walk away because the companies wouldn't move without you because of the relationships that you form with these clients, right? And so for you in your business today, how important is relationships for you?
I think they're hugely important. I mean, I think whether it's customers, whether it's shareholders, whether it's employees, I think relationships are super key. And I think it's interesting too. I've thought a lot. I was just having a conversation with a friend about this. I think social media has really changed the volume of connection that people have, as well, because maybe, for example, people are connections of mine on social media platforms, and they'll read something that I wrote, and they'll be inspired by it, and they'll come back to me and have that connection, right? And I think that is a very, very powerful thing for people. And frankly, I think it's a missed opportunity for people to kind of, grow your own connections. It's not just about, meeting with people. It's really, it's finding some soul, right? That you connect to, that I think is really, really critical. So, and that you're able to have a dialogue about, because I think that people buy from people, right? And that's not necessarily, using money, but really, how is that connection making you feel? How is that connection making you trust? All of those things are critical. And I think it's a whole, before it used to be about, okay, well, how many supplier relationships do they have? Maybe my dad had 50, I don't know how many he had. Today, I think if he were using social media, it'd be, about, I mean, who knows, right? It's across all platforms. I mean, I have over 1 million connections across all platforms, right? I mean, and that's the thing about social media today. It really is about kind of where you connect with people. It doesn't mean you have to physically meet with them or go to lunch with them. It's really about, no, they're cool, they do good things, and that's a connection.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And Cara, man, I want to talk a little bit about this. How important is it to create your own opportunities, right? In the book, and I don't want to give too much of the book because we want everybody to read it for themselves. Of course, but this is one of my favorite things that you do, because I'm a believer of creating your own opportunities, right? In the book, you talked a little bit about, upon graduation, you had classmates that had, opportunities, with these different corporations, and, you're working and you actually, started doing your own research and cold calling. You created your own opportunities and created your own opportunities to have interviews, right? And then you did a tour, an interview tour, like a 5-city interview tour. These opportunities you created yourself, and so you didn't wait for the opportunity to come your way. As a business person, just as a human being in general, how important is it, Cara, to create your own opportunities?
Well, it's funny. I guess I just didn't know any better, right?
Yeah.
Like, know any different, I should say.
Yeah.
And I think I had always done that as a kid.
Yeah.
And I think being the last of 5, I think that was really helpful, to be in that situation. And that if I wanted something, I had to speak up. I had to figure it out. I had to, not complain, but instead figure out how to make it happen. And I think that when I was graduating from school, it was the same thing. I've got to figure out if I want to go and get into the magazine industry, which was initially what I was thinking, then I kept looking at all the mastheads of all these magazines, and it was New York, New York, New York. And I thought, I got to go to New York. I mean, I was a quick study on that. But none of those companies were coming to my school. And so I guess one option is just to look at, what other companies are there that are coming. I guess I could have done that, but I just thought, well, it's just a little bit harder, but maybe in some ways, if I could figure out how to get there and buy my own plane ticket, which is what I did, maybe there will be less competition. That's what I say all the time when I'm speaking on college campuses. I tell that story. And, it's when something is easy, when something's right in front of you, you've got a lot of people who end up showing up, right? Versus the people who are instead going out to find what they're looking for. And I think that also maybe you prepare a little bit more when you're actually trying to figure out how can I actually make that happen? And you're excited, right? But when it finally does happen, just maybe you thought that there was a chance that it wasn't going to happen, but then it did happen. And then you've got this, adrenaline rush to say, oh yeah, it's happening now. So it was an exciting time. And I figured more than anything, and I think this is something I still say to myself when I'm, trying to make something happen, and I don't know whether or not it's going to happen, is what is the worst that can happen, right? I think that that's something that I always share with people. It's like, you just got to go for it. If nothing else, it's just a story on how it didn't really work out that way. And what I found is the most interesting people, often the most successful people, but definitely the most interesting people are the people that have stories, right? Where they're trying to figure out exactly, well, I went right, and then I was going down there, and then this happened, and then I went left, and right. I mean, those are the people where you're just like, wait, what happened now? I mean, it's like the great stories that, if nothing else, it would be entertaining more than anything.
Absolutely. Thank you. And man, you were able to build, like you said, one of the biggest non-alcoholic beverage company, right? And it's all started in your kitchen. Like, first of all, that's an amazing thing to say. It started in your kitchen. So it kind of gives us all hope that that idea is not a bad idea, right? And so why is it important to start where you are?
Well, I think for me, I was just trying to figure things out. I didn't have any experience in the beverage industry. And I think, like a lot of people, I was just tinkering. I was just figuring out stuff in my kitchen. And again, I didn't know how to make a beverage. I didn't know how to get a product into Whole Foods. And every point along the way, I was, going in my car, and then I got to the store, and then I just started asking someone, like, how do I get a product on the shelf at Whole Foods? And they said, well, maybe, you've got to have a shelf stable product. And then I'm like, okay, shelf stable. I kind of knew what it was, but not really.
Yeah.
And they said, oh, you have to have a distributor. And I don't know, there was a fun, it was almost like a game for me to try and figure out how do I achieve something just by every day, just kind of picking away at the rock, right? That's how I kept seeing it. And sometimes things wouldn't work out the way that I wanted it to, but a lot of times it did. And so again, going back to this adrenaline rush, I'm like, okay, I achieved this. Okay, how do I keep moving forward? And I think that that's something, no matter what industry you're in, if you just keep finding those ways to achieve, right? You keep trying and you're going to achieve along the way. Stuff is going to happen that maybe you don't like, you didn't expect. But what you have to remember is the progress that you've made. So maybe you're looking back like 30 days ago, you jot down some notes. I used to make notes in my calendar all the time, like, hey, here's how I'm thinking about things today. I guess it's a journal to some extent. But I think more than anything, that's something that a lot of people forget. Like they just don't do that. And then they get down on themselves. And oftentimes I'll talk to some entrepreneurs and I'll say, wait a minute, you've been doing this for 2 years. Like, look how far you've come. Don't be so hard on yourself, because I think that that's the piece that people kind of forget. And especially when they're just in it, they're in the business and working so hard to, try and make something happen. And it's hard stuff.
Absolutely. And one of the consistent things that you've been saying throughout this conversation is that I didn't know. I just did it. I just got started. I just tried anyway. Right. I think that's, as entrepreneurs, that's very important. That sometimes we get in our heads and we're trying to figure out every step before we take this actual step and trying. But it sounds like you just, I don't know, I'm going to try it though. Is that something, would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it really is, to some extent, I think not having all the information, not focusing too much on getting all of the answers is really the key. Because when you focus so much on what you don't have, what you don't know, then it gets kind of hard to start, right? And I think that that's an important thing for people to understand, is that it's never going to be perfect, right? You've got to at some point just go out and try. And it's got to, in the case of a food product, you certainly don't want to kill anybody along the way, right? Like or get anybody sick, or you want to go and create a product that looks pretty good and you get it out there. And because the most important thing that I learned is that once you actually get a product on the shelf, the consumer is going to tell you stuff that you didn't know was going to be told to you. And I think that that's really important. Get your product out on the shelf, get your product to market, if it's not in the food and beverage industry, as quick as possible, as best as possible. And then you're going to learn a lot of things once you get it. And it might not even be about the product per se. You will probably learn lots of things about the product, but you'll also learn about things like pricing, or how to market the product, what are consumers responding to. In our case, it wasn't even just about the product that we learned about, but also things like the lighting in the stores, how things like hit the packaging and how it made such a difference depending on what the lighting was like in the store. So there's so many variables when you're developing a product that you don't even think about until you're in the game. And that's the thing that I think is really, really important to note. And also have fun with it too, because I think that there are like little things that you just didn't even think about, you are frustrated by now, but then you figure out in each of those situations, how do I keep moving forward? And that's the most important thing to factor in.
Yeah. Give me one moment. It's a little cold here in Georgia, and sometimes my lips get a little chapped, so I just gotta
Woohoo! I love it. I know, I love that.
And speaking of the chapstick, right? Hint, it started off with water, but you guys expounded upon your offerings. What made you guys expound into all these different product offerings?
Well, we came out with the sunscreen, and then also the lip balm, and then a deodorant. We've come out with a few different line extensions. You know, when I think back on why I started this company, it was really uh, the mission to help people get healthier. And I started looking at the sunscreen industry was our first line extension. And there were things that were so clear to me would be easy to fix. I'm not the type of entrepreneur that copies what other people have done. That is one type of entrepreneur, and that's not all that bad either. It's, you know, I know plenty of people who said, oh, yeah, I want to do another vitamin water company or another Red Bull company, right? And that's one way to do things. But the other way is to actually find the holes in the market. So things like nobody was doing an unsweetened flavored water when I came out with Hint. And nobody was really focusing for the sunscreens on an oxybenzone-free sunscreen 3.5 years ago. And so there's more now that are out there, but I thought if I can create a great experience, one that people want to keep buying in the sunscreen market, that doesn't have oxybenzone, that doesn't, the scents that most of the sunscreen companies use too are, it's either unscented or it's coconut, right? It's like, or tropical, I guess is what they call it lots of times. So I wanted different options. So we've got grapefruit and pear and so some great smells outside of just the tropical. So that maybe if you decide that you don't want to smell like a pina colada, then there's lots of other options out there. But again, I think the thing that I was always fascinated by, and I think to some extent this really started for me even when I was 14 years old and had my first job, was really trying to figure out what does the consumer want without asking them that question, right? Based on what their responses are to things. Like, let's say you walk in, I'll take you back to when I was 14 in the toy store, people would come in and they'd want to buy a gift, and for a grandkid or, you know, their little brother or whatever. And you try to probe them without, they never know what they want, right? Instead, you try and get information out of them, and then you suggest things that maybe aren't so obvious to them, but they'll start to describe things. They'll start to storytell in their own way, and then you come up with a solution. That was how I've always thought about great brands, that for me, when they actually solve problems for you that maybe you didn't even know you had. Maybe you quietly talked about something like, you know, are these sunscreens really better for me in some way? Or what is that ingredient that isn't? The minute that we actually launched that sunscreen and we put no oxybenzone on the front, it was amazing how many people said to me, I knew there was a difference between, you know, good sunscreens and maybe some of the other ones that are out there that feel sort of itchy on our skin or whatever it is. So again, if Hint can help consumers to figure out what it is that is sort of keeping them from getting and achieving the best possible health, that for me was what the goal was.
Absolutely. Thank you. And you know, Cara, you know, one of the things that, you know, stops entrepreneurs or just people in general from like just moving anyway is, you know, that fear of rejection, you know, and I could speak for myself, right? You know, I shot my shot. I sent you a DM. I said, hey, Cara, I'd love for you to have you on my show. And you was like, yeah, you know what I'm saying? But what if I never did that, right? What if I would have said, nah, she's not going to answer my DM. She's going to leave me on red or whatever the case may be is. But you said yes. And one of the things that stops most people is they anticipate that no. And because a no is always a no to that person. But for you, no doesn't really mean no. So for you, what makes you like what how did you like get that mindset like no doesn't always mean no, and it may not even mean no at all? Like, how did you overcome that fear of rejection?
Well, again, going back to being the last of 5 kids, you know, my parents said no to me all the time. So, right? I just like get back up again, brush myself off. I mean, it was just, I would laugh about it. I'd try and figure out, okay, well, they said no, now I have to go back and figure out how I get it to a yes. And then I also think being an athlete, I was a gymnast growing up, I runner, you know, I think when you feel like there's people who might say that you're not the best, right? You're working with a team of people. They're gonna at times say, no, it's not, don't do it this way, do it this way. You start to really you know, figure out how do you get a no into, whether it's a no to a yes or a no to, okay, this is the way to do it, or whatever it is. They're all kind of the same thing, if that makes sense. That I think that it was great experience to have been an athlete, to be the last of 5 kids, and ultimately, I think you know that you know, it's not personal. It's really, it's a way to grow more than anything else, and try and figure out. I guess it goes back to also, who is the customer? If when I'm talking to my parents, trying to figure out, you know, if I just keep going, it's a numbers game, right? After a while, I'll wear them out, and then eventually they'll say yes. So I think like that's the way to think about it more than anything. I think people put too much, they put too much weight on that word, and it doesn't mean necessarily that you can't do something. It's maybe figure out another way to ask for it. Maybe it's a different time, whatever it is, when you think about it. And that doesn't mean you're a failure just by hearing the word, no, you can't do it, or whatever it is.
Well, thank you so much for making it easy, not saying no.
Absolutely. I'm honored to be on.
Absolutely. I'm honored to be speaking to you, Cara. And one of the last questions that I'm going to ask you, Cara, is a question I like to ask all of my guests when they come on their show is, what is your definition of success, right? And, you know, success, it varies depending on, you know, over time and who you're talking to. It doesn't have to be financially. It could be mentally, spiritually. It could be happy. It could be family. What is your definition of success?
I think doing something that you really love doing, and feeling like you're creating impact in some way, right? And I think that, I mean, look, you've got a great podcast, and being able to see that people are enjoying it and appreciating it, and that you're helping in some way by connecting people. I mean, it's the same thing, right? Like, I think for me, that is part of the success. And then my family, right? And having people around me that love me and that support me. I mean, that to me is success as well. And being true to myself, being grateful for, you know, being able to recognize all the different opportunities that I've been able to have. All of those things, I think, are, they all sort of bundle together as you know, success. And again, I really mean it from the personal relationships, you know, with, like I said, with support, with family, friends, with, you know, amazing employees over the years, all of those things. Like, I feel really, really lucky.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know, before we end off, Cara, I want to ask you, like, where do you see yourself in the next 5 years? And I asked that because I saw that you recently posted like your Jeff Bezos story, and I want to be able to come back and be like, well, Cara said she was going to do that, and here she did it. So I want to know, like, where do you see yourself in the next 5 years?
Well, you know, I think, you know, I'm still, sorry, my puppy's in the background, screaming outside the door right now. I think more than anything, I'm still on the board of Hint, and, you know, still excited about growing businesses overall. So we'll see. I mean, I'm having fun, enjoying life, hopefully getting out of the COVID world, maybe doing some more traveling, hopefully. So we'll see.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Kai. I really appreciate your time. It was an honor and a pleasure. Thank you so much for taking the time to answer all of my questions.
Thank you so much.